welcome to this brand new edition of Global Lens on News9 Live with me, Neha. Khanna, our focus continues to be on the escalating Israel-Hamas conflict. Today is day 30 of the Israel-Hamas war, and Israel's military says it is now advancing towards Gaza City after its forces cut the enclave into two by reaching the Mediterranean coast. And Israeli Defense Forces spokesperson said essentially today there is a northern Gaza and a southern Gaza. He claimed the IDF would allow for a corridor in order for the residents of northern Gaza and Gaza City to move southward. This is a one-way corridor to the south. We continue to attack with strength and we continue to carry out our ground operation in northern Gaza and the greater Gaza City, he added. Fact is, none of these warnings have guaranteed safety for the civilians, and human rights officials say Israel's evacuation order could breach international law. Gaza has also faced its third communications blackout since the war erupted as humanitarian agencies lost contact with their aid workers. Internet and phone connections are gradually returning though, according to service providers. Over 10,000 Palestinians have now been killed in the Israeli offensive. At least 4,800 of them were children, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. Israeli strikes have hit civilian areas, including residential neighborhoods, hospitals, refugee camps and schools. Well over 1 million of the 2.3 million residents of Gaza have been internally displaced. And an acute shortage of essential supplies, such as food, water and medicines, continues to make an already nightmarish situation far worse, with the humanitarian crisis deepening by the hour. All major UN agencies have said enough is enough in a rare joint statement as they repeat calls for a humanitarian ceasefire. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said there is no question of a ceasefire till the return of all the hostages being held by Hamas. And he added that the word ceasefire should be removed from their lexicon by both Israel's enemies and friends. Huge explosions have been heard across northern Gaza as intense bombing continues. Israel says it hit 450 targets on Sunday. The director of Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City has said people were carrying dead bodies by donkeys and in their own cars because communication was cut off and they couldn't reach ambulance services. Israel began bombing Gaza after Hamas killed more than 1,400 people in Israel on the 7th of October and kidnapped at least 240 others. 31 Israeli soldiers have been killed in the Gaza ground offensive. Meanwhile, America's top diplomat Antony Blinken has met his counterpart in Turkey as he rounded off his tour of the region to push for pauses in fighting. In another significant development, the US military has made a rare announcement saying a guided missile submarine has arrived in the Middle East, a message of deterrence clearly directed at regional adversaries such as Iran, as the Biden administration tries to avoid a broader conflict amid the Israel-Hamas war. The US Central Command said on the social media that an Ohio-class submarine was entering its area of responsibility. A picture posted with the announcement appeared to show the sub in the Suez Canal north of Cairo. The sub has not been named, but the US Navy has 4 Ohio-class guided missile submarines, which are former ballistic missile subs converted to fire Tomahawk cruise missiles rather than nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles. Each of these subs can carry 154 Tomahawk cruise missiles, and a Tomahawk can carry up to a 1,000-pound high-explosive warhead. The US military rarely announces the movements or operations of its fleet of ballistic and guided missile subs. Instead, these vessels operate in near complete secrecy. The announcement is a clear message of deterrence directed at Iran and its proxies in the region. The sub joins a number of other US Navy assets already in the area, including 2 carrier strike groups and an amphibious ready group.
Today marks 30 days of holding of a 9-month-old baby hostage, Kfir Bivas. My young boy just turned a year a couple of days ago. We're going to defeat Hamas. We're going to free our hostages, 240. Some of them are from all over around the world. We're going to free our hostages. It's a top priority. And we are dealing with a murderous organization that did a massacre on the 7th of October. We will not forget the massacre. I hope the world will not forget the massacre of the 7th of October. We came up in the morning, waking up, and babies were killed in their beds, and young women were burnt alive in a music festival. We will not let the world forget that. And we will not let the world forget Kfir Bivas, a baby after 30 days being held in Gaza. It's unimaginable. It's a crime against humanity. It's a war we did not start and did not seek. And now we're fighting. We're fighting to defeat Hamas, to free our hostages, and to free Gaza from Hamas.
The deep concern here for the terrible toll that Gaza is taking on Palestinians, on men, women, and children in Gaza, innocent civilians, a concern that we share and that we're working on every single day. We've engaged the Israelis on steps that they can take to minimize civilian casualties. We're working, as I said, very aggressively on getting more humanitarian assistance into Gaza, and we have very concrete ways of doing that, and I think you'll see in the days ahead that assistance can expand in significant ways so that more gets into people who need it and gets to the people who need it, as well as making sure that people can continue to come out of Gaza. I think we've had important conversations, and more than conversations, we're making sure that the different influence and relationships that countries in the region have, including the countries that I visited or spoke to, that they're using that to make sure that this conflict and crisis doesn't spread. And that's critical, and I think countries are very much engaged in trying to make sure that doesn't happen.
Today I can announce that we are further increasing the humanitarian aid to Gaza by another 25 million euros. By doing so, the European Union would spend a total of 100 million euro in humanitarian aid for the civilians in Gaza.
We believe that the bombing should be stopped as soon as possible, a ceasefire should be established as soon as possible, and aid and assistance should be provided to the oppressed and proud people of Gaza as soon as possible. These horrible crimes and crimes against humanity are genocide, which is being carried out by the Zionist regime with the support of the Americans and some European countries.
All right, so just where is the Israel-Hamas war headed? This is, of course, as we said, day 30th of the war. To understand this better, we are joined by a panel of experts. We have with us, live from Israel, Lev Aaron, an Israeli columnist and journalist and former coordinator for the India-Israel Parliamentary Friendship League. We also have with us Colonel Myri Eisen, director of the International Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University in Israel. And completing the panel tonight is Lieutenant General Rameshwar Roy, defense and geopolitical expert here in India. Thank you so much to all three of you for joining us. Colonel Myri Eisen, if I could begin with you. Firstly, welcome back to Global Lens. Now, it's been almost a month since this war began. Israel now says we have cut the Gaza Strip into two. Could you please explain to our viewers what exactly that means and where the war is currently poised?
From the beginning, and as I was listening to your very interesting introduction, I just like to say this war did not erupt. This war was started. It was started in a very specific way with a very specific all-out attack. What Israel has been doing inside the Gaza Strip from the beginning, and more so with the ground operation, is to get to the Hamas terrorists. They base themselves in their pre-plan, in what they prepared, not in the last few weeks, not in the last few months, but for years. They've planned a defense system which is built both above ground, where there are, as you've said, 2.3 million civilians, and their underground subterranean arena. What the Israeli military is doing is getting to these two different areas that Hamas terror fighters are fighting from. This is their defense system. They did that horrific attack, and now they are using both the 2.3 million civilians and the 241 Israeli people and people from all around the world as their defense, as their get out of jail card. This is the most criminal act you can think of. I'm going to call it for the moment the genocidal Hamas attack And what we're trying to do is to get to the terrorists, to their capabilities. That means going into these cities and going underneath them. It is a very challenging arena.
It is a challenging arena. There is no doubt about that. This is the first time that we've actually seen Israel launch a ground offensive into Gaza. And obviously, this has happened under unprecedented circumstances. Lev Aaron, if I could come to you at this point, we're talking about how the war is proceeding. Israel says we've cut Gaza into two. The Israeli Prime Minister says the word ceasefire should be removed from the lexicon, both by Israel's friends and enemies. There is no question of a ceasefire, at least until the time that all the hostages are released and returned safely by Hamas. And then you have America's top diplomat going from one country to another in the Middle East, holding important talks, perhaps in an effort to somewhat defuse the situation, but at the moment it looks like things are only escalating. What do you make of how this war is proceeding, and how do you think the global media perceives Israel's counteroffensive and refusal to even entertain the idea of a ceasefire?
So I think that during the last 2 days, we have some kind of effective blockade in Gaza. And we cannot forget what happens on the Lebanese border or the Hezbollah border.
Yes.
The leader of Hezbollah said, Palestinians put us also under surprise. And he said to the Palestinians, you are alone, the Hamas Palestinians, right, in Gaza. You are alone in this war. We will not go to war for you. Solidarity will not be there. Maybe small solidarity, but not a real solidarity. So it means that now Israel feels, at least as the Israeli army is concerned, that this blockade will create two Gazas, and most of Gazans from the north will move to the south, and then it will be easier for Israel to defeat Hamas. Now, of course, pressure is there on Israel. Pressure from international media, pressure from the Americans, pressure for ceasefire, pressure for some kind of humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. But I think that the inner politics of Israel cannot digest anything but a full victory over Hamas. So I think that as far as Israel is concerned at this point, even if we see more and more demonstrations against Israel, even if we see Israel in a pejorative way in some liberal media houses, still I think that Israel is very committed to military victory that will lead to diplomatic victory. At least this is the picture right now.
Okay, that's very interesting. So let me take this to our Indian guest, Lieutenant General Rameshwar Roy. Sir, you heard our Israeli guests. Lev Aaron has an interesting take. He says, yes, there is growing pressure on Israel to call a ceasefire. There is pressure from UN and all its agencies. There's pressure from Middle Eastern countries. There's pressure from America. You know, even if it's all happening behind the scenes and nobody is saying it on record. However, he says domestic politics in Israel is such that nothing short of a quote-unquote complete victory over Hamas will end this war. But the question, sir, is what would constitute a complete victory for Israel? Can there be one in a war such as this?
Neha, we as Indian soldiers probably have the longest history with the war of terrorism, right from the time that we got our independence on the northern borders as well as in the eastern borders. Let me tell you very clearly as a soldier that terrorist outfits, no matter in what form and strength they operate at a point of time, they cannot be completely eliminated. And at no point when any side can claim to have any kind of complete victory. As of now, as I read this situation, to my mind, what has happened here is that on one side we have the desperation of Hamas, who have been over the years just desperately waiting for some kind of a lasting solution which has not come about. On the other side, we have the anger that Israel has got, also a bit of a face saving because of the kind of surprise with which Hamas has been able to attack them. So here is a national pride that is to be regained, or that is to be restored, much like the same way as the US psyche was hit when the trade towers were hit and they went headlong into bombing the Afghanistan into Stone Age. A similar kind of a situation, to my mind, is prevailing right now. Also, it's a war of unequals. No one can ever match the might of Israel as they ever had with their neighbors, regardless of the fact that Hamas and the Hezbollah and all lot of people operating from Yemen, operating from Syria, operating from Iraq, whatever they do, whatever happens, Israel is too strong for any one of them. I mean, you still remember the war of 1967 and 73. Arab-Israel war took place when the Arab was completely united with much more kind of organized military resistance and military offensive that came about. If that couldn't do anything to Israel, then there is no likelihood of anything happening to Israel even now. But what is ultimately going to happen here is that the entire conflict which is going on, the rest of the worldview and the effort is only to limit the conflict and not allow the bigger players to get into it. And my sense also tells me that bigger players are also not interested in getting into it. Therefore, a lot of deterrence is being placed to deter them from even thinking of getting into this conflict. That is issue number one. Issue number two is the complete war, complete conflict as it stands today is going to end up with the huge amount of loss of lives, huge amount of humanitarian crisis for decades that we can keep sorting it out. But the end product is just one, that why the world has not been able to find a lasting solution to this problem is something which I am unable to actually see, because even now, I think we nearly thought that they were going to find a solution for peaceful coexistence. And that is the time this desperation from the Hamas has come about. So I do not know if somebody is really interested in finding a peaceful solution to this problem, or we just let this happen time and again, because a complete victory in military sense and then landing up into a diplomatic victory, I don't think these are just the play of words. I don't think that kind of situation, because as it is, Israel, with the lobby that it has in US and the rest of the world, is too strong for their enemies. I mean, what more diplomatic clout you can have than what you have right now already?
Again, what you're saying is very interesting, sir. So let me take this to Colonel Mari Aisen. Colonel Mari Aisen, of course, nobody can contest that what happened in Israel on the 7th of October is too horrifying for even words. It was barbarity at its worst. However, here's a retired Lieutenant General of the Indian Army who says, look, India, for example, is also a country that has been at the receiving end of terror. But unfortunately, this is something that we've had to battle for decades now. Not months or years, but decades. That is the unfortunate reality. And he says, in a war such as this, there is no such thing as a complete victory. Therefore, I'm going to ask you this. I know that from day one, Israel has said, we're going to finish Hamas. But I'm still going to ask you this pointed question. What would a quote-unquote complete victory look like for Israel, and at what cost is it likely to come? What time frame are we looking at?
So first of all, I greatly appreciate listening to both the Lieutenant General and the other Israeli. And I want to say the following when it comes to the terms of complete victory. There is no such thing in any kind of war, anywhere at any time. And Israel has been fighting against terrorists, sir, for our entire existence. We've been fighting both against countries and states. When you mentioned 67 and 73, that was countries that attacked Israel. And we have been fighting for almost 50 years against terrorists. And here I am going to take a point. What does it mean to demolish Hamas capabilities? We've never said that we would erase Hamas. We've never said we'll erase the Palestinians. I am together with the general, and I, Miri, would like to arrive at a peaceful resolution with the Palestinians. But please let us all separate between the murderous terror organization called Hamas, who have never wanted to arrive at a peaceful resolution, sir. They were against the Palestinian Authority. They were against all of the different decisions that were made in the 1990s, for all of the years. They have been against it. They call for the destruction of Israel. That's Hamas. And what we want to do when we talk about erasing or eradicating is to get to as much of their terror military capability. They are a terror army. That isn't easy, and I don't think that we will eradicate it. What worries me more is when people don't make that distinction between Hamas that calls for the destruction of the state of Israel, and that's the attack that they did, and we need to go after the capabilities, the infrastructure, and to get to our hostages, these people that were taken out of their bed Saturday morning from 9 months through 87 years old. And between arriving at a resolution, let's get rid of Hamas. When I say get rid of it, destroy those capabilities. For me, victory, if I want to end this issue, the victory is that the Hamas leadership will know that it lost, that the Palestinian people will understand that this path of going on a genocidal terror attack is not the way to arrive at a peaceful resolution.
Okay, you know, it is my job to play the devil's advocate, and I'm going to do that. You said something interesting, Colonel Eisen. I have this question for you. You saying, please, draw a distinction between the Hamas and Palestinian civilians. That's what we as Israelis have done. Actually, ma'am, to be honest with you, that is what the rest of the world indeed has done. What they are saying is that Palestinians, all Palestinians are not Hamas. The 2.3 million residents of Gaza are not all Hamas. The over 10,000 Palestinians who have been killed in the Israeli counteroffensive are not all Hamas. And most certainly, the 4,800 children who have been killed in the Israeli counteroffensive were not Hamas. And when you say that the attack on your territory was a genocidal one, now the cruel irony is that the exact same allegation is being leveled against you, that it is Israel which is now carrying out a genocide of the Palestinian people. How would you respond to that?
Respond?
Yes.
My heart goes out to any child killed. My heart goes out to all of the civilians. My heart goes out to anybody anywhere who is thrust into this situation. I hold Hamas responsible. You, for some reason, do not. Hamas built an entire genocidal attack to be protected by their civilians. We have been telling civilians for weeks, as you said before, to go south. We have been isolating the northern portion and consistently, not over the last 2 days, telling the civilians, not to you in India, in Arabic, into their telephones, into the different aspects, go south to safe places. 250,000 Israelis are dislocated right now as rockets are fired in. The government of Israel has tried to protect us from that kind of terror. When we look at it and we put it on that same aspect, Israel never targets civilians. The Hamas, the ones who were built into that population, and that's why it is so challenging, have built themselves inside there, are in that area. And I have to say, if you and me, the two of us, two women here, allow Hamas to do a genocidal attack and to use their civilians as their own human shields, and for them to succeed, I really fear what that can do in other places in the world. This is an example that you do not want to have succeed. This is not something that you want to have succeed in any way. And my heart goes out for every child killed at any time. We have to live with that. We cry over them. I'd like to hear that same idea from all of the people in the arena. And what I've heard over the last 3 weeks has been horrific outbreak that this is about Israel. And that's taking it out of the context of what we're talking about here. And I really do hope that we can bridge that gap there, because for me, that's at the heart of the challenge. separate Hamas from the Palestinians, free the Palestinians from this deadly Hamas. And that's not just better for Israel and for the Palestinians, that is better for the entire world.
Now, this is where the problem lies, a battle of the narratives. And I want to just place on record, ma'am, that I am no apologist for a terror organization like Hamas. I would be the first person, in fact, I have on every show that I've done in the last 1 month, strongly condemned their barbarism. And I believe that what they've done is absolutely inhumane. And justice must be done to those monsters, to those beasts who did what they did to those 1,400 innocent Israelis.
How would you do it?
But at the same time, and let me go back to Lev Aaron at this point. Lev Aaron, here is where the problem lies. The moment you say that innocent Palestinian civilians are being killed in Israeli airstrikes and ground offenses, you are labeled as a Hamas apologist. How is being sympathetic to the women and children of Hamas, I beg your pardon, of Gaza, who have been killed in the last 1 month, how is being sympathetic to them the same as being an apologist or a supporter for Hamas? Why can't I strongly condemn Hamas and their terrorism, and at the same time, why can't my heart bleed for those women and children of Gaza who are losing their lives every day? How are the two mutually exclusive? Isn't this where the problem lies? The moment you say something like this for the Palestinians, Israelis label you pro-Hamas.
So, first of all, I'm honored to be here. And the second thing, I heard what you said before about your feelings when we were butchered 1 month ago. And I believe you with all my heart. I believe you that even if you ask hard questions about how we Israelis treat Gaza, it does not mean that you have any sympathy for what was 1 month ago. So let's start with this. The second thing is that sometimes we have to look for the long run. We have no other choice. And I think that as far as we as Israelis are concerned, in the long run, more Palestinians who hate Hamas will be killed if right now we do not wage a real war against Hamas. We have no other choice but a full victory over Hamas. We know that in this war, not only Hamas people are getting killed, but since it is their shield, since they are doing every effort to make us kill their own civilians, and sometimes they themselves kill their own civilians who try to go from North Gaza to South Gaza, I feel that most of us, we feel that we have no choice but full victory, because we feel that as far as death toll is concerned, what is done right now is less a tragedy than what could have happened if we were silent and let Hamas keep controlling Gaza. So it is like a very complicated reply. If you don't get it, I can understand you, but I think that most of the countries who face terrorism, they kill innocent people from time to time, and their heart is bleeding when they kill innocent people. But still, they need to do the work to keep themselves. And what is a full victory for Israel? Right now, Hamas sees all Israel as part of Palestine, of imaginary Palestine. So they have some kind of moral, let's say, they're obligated to kill all of us because we live in what they see as Palestine. If there is a new order in Gaza, in which there is some kind of a power that sees part of the region as Palestine and part of it as Israel, then we can get some kind of partition of the land into two sovereign states. Thank you.
All right, Lev, thank you very much for understanding the moral dilemma that some of us have. We do not want to see Israelis being butchered. At the same time, we don't want to see innocent Palestinians being killed. That is at the heart of it all. It's as simple as that, though I know there are no easy answers. Let me go back to Lieutenant General Rameshwar Roy. Lieutenant General Roy, Um, so we all agree there is no such thing as a complete victory in any war, least of all in a war such as this. But let me ask you, what kind of a face saver do you think Netanyahu and his far-right government would be content with at the end of the day to be able to declare victory and exit Gaza? Because there has to be an end to this war at some point in time. There is pressure already from the Americans on the Israelis. Like I said, even if it's all happening behind the scenes and not in front of the cameras. What do you think is the kind of outcome / face saver that Netanyahu and his government would be content with?
You see, to my mind, the only face saving that is possible is that if the international pressure is brought upon both the sides to go in for a ceasefire, limit the conflict in the sense that the other players who are sitting on the fence
But a
to jump in.
ceasefire is not what the Israelis would be happy with right now, and Netanyahu has completely ruled it out, sir.
Neha, I'm telling you, both the sides, be it Hamas, be it Israelis, both the sides are actually trying to now speak of an aim which is absolutely a theoretical kind of an aim. I have already said this, that trying to distinguish between who are the Hamas and who are the Palestinians is absolutely impossible. I mean, you see, terrorists have no defined targets. They're not definable military targets that you can say these are the terrorist houses, targets and all that. And likewise, you cannot distinguish between a normal population person and a person who is picked up arms to be Hamas. I mean, we've been trying this in the own country for a very, very long time. So even I would give an extreme example. Even in a military conflict, where the soldiers are definable, the military targets are definable, when conflicts happen, the cost is borne by the civilians. And cost is borne by the nation in terms of a lot of collateral damages. I'm very certain that these initial reactions which are there, that ceasefire word doesn't exist and all that, I've yet to see that the ceasefire doesn't happen. So ultimately, they will have to bring the pressure down on both the sides to firstly limit the conflict, going for a ceasefire in a manner of speaking that Hamas infrastructure and the numbers and the leaders and all, they have been destroyed, killed, eliminated, and therefore a kind of a moral victory has been achieved by the Israel. And then they will sit down. I'm very certain that if no solution has been found in last about 77 years, no solution could be found in next 70 years either. They have to actually, both the sides have to walk the talk when they say that they want to find a peaceful solution. And peaceful solution would mean that present conflict, firstly, it is limited, then it is stopped in terms of, putting out a narrative to say that, okay, Israel has got the moral victory or they have achieved all the aims that they had set out for themselves. As far as Hamas is concerned, it's very unrealistic aim for them also to say that they can destroy Israel or they can eliminate Israel from the face of the map. Absolutely impossible. So these are very, very, I would say, theoretical kind of unrealistic targets that both the sides are trying to have. I'm very certain that as just about a month now gone, as the conflict proceeds further, some solution would be found in terms of stopping this conflict and then sitting across the table, because no matter how much you fight, no matter how much whatever happens, closest example is the Second World War itself from 39 to 45. Ultimately, people have to sit across the table to find the solution to whatever was the reason for the conflict.
That's the only way wars can end.
Absolutely. There is no other way. There is no other way. No matter how much everybody tries to sort of put up a brave face before the. Ultimately, they have to go in for it. Let's accept it.
Well, I think that is a very realistic assessment, sir. So let me take this to Colonel Myri Aysin. Colonel Aysin, your thoughts on what the Lieutenant General from the Indian Army is saying. He says that both sides seem to have unrealistic targets. I wonder what your thoughts on that are. Two, I have another question for you. What do you make of the fact that the US military has made a very rare announcement that a guided missile submarine is now deployed in the Middle East? Is it a message of deterrence aimed at Iran? And do you believe that this will be enough to prevent a further widening of this conflict, or is it still likely to become a multi-front war for Israel given the challenge from at least Syria and Lebanon?
So two very interesting and rather different questions. I'll start with the one and go to the second. I found what the Lieutenant General was saying very interesting. I do think that at the end, it's very hard when you're inside and you're emotional, and the events that happened here were unprecedented, to be able to look at them in the way that he was presenting. I do think that at the end, both sides, but here I want to define what both sides are. And in this case, I think that what Israel is trying to say is that we are acting in a way that we have not in the past against some of that terror infrastructure, most of it in a way that we never have before. And the casualties which go into my heart are a horrible, horrible way that I don't know how to get around right now. But he's absolutely right. At the end, at some stage, there will be a ceasefire. At the end, at some stage, we will need to sit down, but we're going to be sitting down with Palestinians who are not the Hamas. And that I can say right now. So that's a way to look at it. As we said, 2.3 million people there. Let's see what the alternatives are. And I don't think that makes it any easier. When it comes to the United States military deployment in the Middle East, and this connects also to your opening, that extensive opening about Secretary of State Blinken's hopping through the Middle East and going to so many different countries. Everybody, and I would say even including India, are very, very worried and wary that this Israel-Hamas conflict, the war that Hamas started, should become something broader. And in its own way, I can say it's not that Israel wants it to be broader, but I want to tell you that while we've been talking, Hezbollah up north, our northern border, has not been quiet from October 7th. Rockets, missiles, anti-tank missiles have constantly been fired from Lebanon into Israel, both by Hezbollah and by other Palestinian terrorist groups that are in Lebanon. So I'm just saying, everybody in the world wants to contain it. Part of the containment is, by the words that you were using before, the deterrence. And I think that a nuclear submarine is all about that it has the Tomahawk missiles. It's making a statement. This is something where it's saying, Iran, watch out with the use you're doing of your proxies. And your proxies can be the Houthis in Yemen, who, I hate to say this on Indian TV, but the missiles that they fired at Israel in the last 2 weeks can reach India too. Just watch out. That's the Houthis in Yemen. The Iraqi Hezbollah Shiite proxies that have been attacking U.S. bases all over the Middle Eastern area. And of course, Hezbollah that has been armed by Iran over decades and has 10 times the terror army capabilities that Hamas has. So there's no question that that's in the name of the game. And we don't want it to expand, but none of us want to be able to live right now within this area where you have a terror army that has 10 times more than what Hamas has. So these are the challenges we face right now. United States is clear cut at the governmental level, at the military level, of being part of it. They're not the only ones. You showed before the EU in that sense, in that humanitarian support. As I said, I want to help the civilians, but both the Europeans and different countries all are on board in that sense, and understanding that we need to withstand the expansion of this conflict, and that Hezbollah is to a large degree testing the waters. And if they join in, that's already a whole different degree of war.
All right. So in addition to the Hamas that Israeli are fighting right now, there are challenges on the Syrian front, on the Yemen front, on the Lebanon front, and then of course there is Iran, because most Israelis seem to believe that Iran was perhaps in many ways the architect of those terror attacks that took place on the 7th of October. Let me go back to Lev at this point. Lev, you mentioned earlier that there is pressure from different quarters of the world on Israel to call a ceasefire, and that includes a strong ally like the United States. Let's talk about Antony Blinken. As was mentioned earlier, he's been country hopping in the Middle East. He was in Ankara earlier, where he met his counterpart, but correct me if I'm wrong, he couldn't meet the Turkish President Erdogan. He's met with a series of leaders in West Asia, and I wonder, you smiled, I wonder if you have thoughts on that. And he's met a whole lot of leaders in West Asia. I want to know, according to you as a journalist, what has Antony Blinken managed to achieve from his recent visits and meetings with multiple leaders in the Middle East?
Okay, so the people that Blinken met and didn't meet in Turkey, it is part of the Desi Turkey politics. some, let's say, not everybody in Turkey finds it now suitable to meet Blinken, and they will find other channels also. So I think on one hand, there is a pressure on Israel. On the other hand, we have some kind of a double talk, because you can imagine that the things that the Saudis, the Jordanians, the Egyptians, and the Palestinian Authority, the things that they say openly is not the things that they tell us Israelis in secret way. Okay, I think that many people who will go to a talk show and they are like liberal Palestinians and they will say how harsh Israel about Gaza, they themselves are very much afraid of a Hamas victory. They are very much understand they cannot live under Hamas authority in Gaza or in the West Bank. So we have a lot of hypocrisy in geopolitical arena. This is something that all of us understand. And we understand that the things that Blinken tells us openly, he tells us other things, let's say, secretly or in other channels. So on one hand, Blinken wants more humanitarian aid to Gaza to pacify the Arab world and the Muslim world. On the other hand, I feel that even this Biden administration, that many of us Israelis, we were very afraid about the Biden administration. And I think that until now, it is like crystal clear that most of the Biden administration and most of the American establishment, they want our victory over Hamas as much as we want it. So I don't feel that there is, of course, a pressure on Israel, but it is not the pressure that we could have imagined that would be after 1 month of war against Hamas, with over 10,000 victims in Gaza. I think it is much less, and we have to understand it.
Right. I'll give the final word to Lieutenant General Rameshwar Roy. So what do you make of the growing pressure on Israel? It's not just aid agencies, humanitarian agencies, the United Nations, and every country in the Middle East, which is, sort of screaming for a ceasefire, saying the humanitarian crisis is worsening by the hour. But, as has been mentioned by our friend from Israel, even the country's closest ally, America, has been putting pressure on it behind the scenes. There are repeated calls for a humanitarian pause, whatever that means. How do you think Israel is likely to navigate this path over the next few days and weeks as it continues to face this global pressure? Because now it is being called a genocide of Palestinians.
If you really ask me, there is nothing to navigate about, because on one hand, the kinetic warfare is happening between the Hamas, Israel, and the rest of the allies in whichever way it's taking place. On the other side is just the war of words. Let's accept it. Let's accept it. There's a complete failure of any kind of a international understanding to resolve the conflicts as they had set out to when the Second World War ended. Why I'm taking the Second World War as a reference? That there is already a big conflict that is taking place between Russia and Ukraine, and the world has just been watching and playing with words and politics. Right now, the same thing is happening. I am very clear that everybody is trying to play up their own interests, and as the interest slowly, the interest would get achieved, we will think that the conflict has got limited or conflict has got stopped due to all these pressures which are being created. But the reality would be that the conflict has come to a dead end. The conflict has come to a point where one side feels that there is nothing else to achieve, there is nothing else to destroy. Whatever they were set out to get, they have already got it. And that's a time that people will try to then say or come out with the logic or come out with the reason that, look, we've been trying for ceasefire. Finally, look, we are successful. So this is the sense that I am getting, the way international community have been behaving on the many conflicts which have been coming off and on, and presently the two big ones, one between Russia and Ukraine, and the second, this one that has started. Talking of Hamas and Hezbollah, let me tell you that these two terrorist groups, one belongs to a Shia group, one belongs to a Sunni group. One group would be interested in the weakening of the other group so that the remaining group takes a priority. So I don't think they are going to enter in the conflict in a big way, and some kind of a road show or a side show can go on. Nothing beyond that. So my sense is the same. What I started my beginning of the discussion, that ultimately everybody is trying to play and try to look for their own individual national interest, trying to please one lobby or the other with war of words, whereas on the ground the action which is continuing, they are wanting that also to carry on, so that all these so-called terror groups get weakened and all. We have seen enough of the US intervention in Iraq, we have seen their intervention in Afghanistan, we have seen their intervention elsewhere, and whatever has been the outcome, I don't think the outcome were too encouraging.
You're
So
right, sir.
going
And let's not forget, President Biden told Netanyahu on his visit to Tel Aviv, we made a lot of mistakes after 9/11 and we hope you will not repeat those mistakes.
Exactly. So that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make, that ultimately many of these conflicts will take their natural course. People will keep playing with war of words till both the sides run out of their steam and finally sit down. I don't think they'll sit down across the table to have a talk as such, but a kind of a, you can say that uncomfortable peace will prevail ultimately. That's my final word on it.
And I have to agree with you, when you talk about the Russia-Ukraine war, which has now been on for more than a year and a half, or now the Israel-Hamas war, and the number of people who have died, I think it is a major failure, really, of the international community. That has to be said. The world has just acted like a mute spectator. And really that does go for agencies like the United Nations as well. On that note, Lev Aaron, Colonel Maria Ison and Lieutenant General Rameshwar Roy, thank you so much for joining us on Global Lens tonight and sharing your perspectives with us on this ongoing conflict.
Thank you.
Well, 1,400 threads of grace and inspiration. A unique fashion show was held in the Israeli capital, Tel Aviv, today to mark the 30th day of the horrific October 7 massacre by Hamas that left 1,400 Israelis dead. The 120 Women Leadership Forum, in collaboration with the International Day of Inspiration, came together for a memorial performance and prayer on the 30th day of the Black Sabbath. The participants, family members and volunteers wove together what they called 1,400 threads of grace and inspiration at the Habima Square in Tel Aviv, one thread for each Israeli life lost. Many Israeli fashion designers participated in this unique show held in memory of all those killed on the 7th of October. The organizers said together they remembered these people and wove light and hope. The forum behind the event is helping the families who lost loved ones in those terror attacks and raising resources for them. All right, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. If you have been, thanks so much for joining. Do watch us again at the same time tomorrow. Thank you so much for your time.